Hey, I'm Sam, and this is the view this morning. It's very early, as I always make my videos early in the morning, but I woke up about 4 o'clock and it was already light and I couldn't sleep, so I had a coffee and here I am. But I need to turn this way, otherwise you won't be able to see me. I don't think you can see me this way, or maybe you can a little bit. Hopefully no one will walk along the path behind me. So, where do I begin? I want to communicate the changes that I'm experiencing as a person that's lived with the repetition of the cycle of abuse that I experienced as a kid. And that cycle was desperation and crisis. Life or death struggle is how it felt my entire life. You can't really explain to people who haven't experienced that what it's like to live with just the crippling shame of what we go through, and wrapped around that shame is an apology for our existence. In a way, you may not feel it that way, but I did. Constantly pleading for permission to be here, to be in the world, to exist, pleading for permission to exist. Is it okay if I am here? I'm sorry, I am here. So the changes I'm going through, in my mid-50s are pretty staggering. And, that's what I'm trying to do in these videos, is to communicate what those changes are and what it's like to emerge into a world that's always been out of reach. I've been here, but not really here. So, that's what these videos are, my document of transformation. But, the changes I've gone through over the last 3 or 4 months have been the most intense. And I've done a lot of talking over the last 10 years, most of all to myself. I began to really unravel when I was living on an island way over there off the west coast of Scotland. And I'd been running all my life, and I couldn't run any further when I got to the island. And that's when I started to really face myself. And, I was so convinced of my own corruption and unworthiness. I felt I was damaging. My presence on that island was damaging to nature, to the trees, and I'd lived with that all my life. And really, it was just nature. The feelings that I began to emerge was just the pristine kind of truth of nature, reflecting back my own psychic noise. And when I left that island about 5 years ago, I didn't feel like that anymore. I felt like that place was my mother and my father. It was a place of love. And it took me a few years to realise that what I was feeling was the love that I felt. It wasn't coming from the land, it was being reflected back from me. And so I thought, okay, I'm ready to leave now. And I left. And then that's when the work really happened, because coming back to civilization, I started to inhabit the habitual identity that I'd lived with all of my life. I began to have social interactions, and where I lived on the island, it was isolated. I could go for weeks without seeing anybody or talking to anyone. So when I came back to civilization, I'm still in a really, look where I live. It's still remote and beautiful, and there are a few people here, but I started to interact with people again, and all the insecurities and apologies and unworthiness began to surface again, and I was still trying to get what I wanted in the way that I tried my whole life. And what I wanted was security, money, and so I just went straight back to where I was before. I began to unravel, and started to use the same methods, the same thought processes, the same, ways of being, the ways of showing up, the ways of grasping to try and get what I wanted. And it didn't work. But I kept doing it. I kept trying. I kept trying to be the person I used to be, and it didn't work. And over like a 2 or 3 year period, I just felt more and more pain, more and more agony. And I was making videos for this channel as well, and I was asking questions that deconstructed my identity. And eventually I just reached this point where I realised that the person I was couldn't get what I wanted, because I wasn't capable of achieving what I wanted in the way that I was going about it. And I lost the only thing that was keeping me going at that point, and that was hope. And when I lost hope, I just completely fell apart. And had a catastrophic breakdown. It was a long time coming. And it was the best thing that ever happened. So that was 3 years ago. And, we have a choice at that point. I had a choice. Carry on or don't. I carried on because, my mother and I had worked for 20 years at that point, over 20 years to build some kind of relationship. And it was extremely difficult. And she'd been through enough pain, and I didn't want her to find my body. And my dog was 18 at that point, and she was dying. And we'd been on a long, long journey together. If you go to my blog, there's a piece of writing there called "In the High Places Above the World" or something like that. And I write about the journey that my dog and I have been on. When I first got her in London, I was lost in like severe drug abuse, and her innocence began to make me realise that how I was living was affecting other people and affecting her. And in her eyes, the innocence of her eyes, I saw reflected my own pain, really. And I realised that she was trapped in my world, and it was hurting her. And so she really began to make me question how I was showing up in the world. And that was, nearly 20 years ago. So that's how long I've been trying to resolve this, trying to break the pattern that had bound me my entire life, the pattern of abuse that was given to me as a kid. And so I didn't want to abandon her. I wanted to be there for her passing. And it's been extremely difficult. But the last 3 years of rebuilding and learning how to be in the world in a different way, by actually processing the pain that I couldn't even go near for my entire life, that transformation is, quite miraculous, really. And so over those 10 years, I've reached out to various people to help me, and they couldn't really. And I know that lots of people that watch these videos who are in similar conditions, unless the therapist is really, really good and you are willing to let them help you, then you don't really make much progress, and you become kind of more attached to the pain. And I've had many philosophical arguments with various counsellors I've had about them trying to fix me and me not wanting them to fix me wanting to hold on to the pain, because to me it had value. And I suppose it does in a way, because the value is, the value of our suffering is it brings us to humility. And I think I resisted the help that I was even looking for. because I knew that that pain was the fuel of that was going to be transmuted into presence, and you can't be present without humility. So about a year and a half ago, a friend locally, she put me onto a somatic therapist, and I spoke to, because I didn't have any means of transport, I just spoke to that somatic therapist for online every 3 or 4 weeks, and the sessions were helpful. But then I got to a point where I'd saved enough money from walking dogs and things like that, to buy a little car, and then I started to travel to go and see her, and that was 3 or 4 months ago. And so she's had her hands on my body now for about 3 or 4 months, and I see her every 2 weeks, and she touches me. And I realised when I started to see her that I've never been touched my whole life. And so when we first started working together, she could touch my feet and up to my knees. And sometimes she could touch me here or on my heart. If I had my hand over my heart, she would touch me there, touch my hand. Or she put her hand on my lower back. And then we started to gradually move towards the abdomen. And, I've had a lot of trauma there. And she said she can feel the internal scars from all the surgery I had. And she can feel the psychic scars as well. And the sexual trauma I've had, which is a lot. She first touched me there on my tummy, just above the pubic bone. It was one of the most powerful things I've ever experienced, because that's when I really realised that I've never really experienced intimacy. And when she touched me there, it unlocked deep, deep, deep emotions. And I saw things more clearly. And so she's only touched me there a couple of times, because it is such a sensitive area. And about 2 weeks ago, she asked if she could touch me there, and I said yes. She put her hand on my belly, sort of pushed gently, and I really tried to relax into her touch. And I tried harder than ever, really, if that's not a kind of, if that makes sense, to try and relax. But I did. I tried to relax, and before I knew what was happening, I had a flashback, and then I had another, and another, and another, and another, and within the space of a few minutes, it became unstoppable, and all these flashbacks were pushing into me, and it just became one long scene, really, of various kind of vignettes of experience. And it started around 4 or 5 years old and went all the way right up until my 30s, late 30s, because I had something on my mind when I entered the session. And it was a series of, awful things that happened in my late 30s around, severe drug abuse and stuff I can't really talk about. And I saw the series of events that led up to that. And it started around 4 or 5 years old, and I saw the little boy that I was going through all these different scenes of experience right up until those events. And I saw very clearly that nothing changed. It was all the same thing. It was one long scene. I hadn't changed from that 4 or 5 year old boy right up until I was in my 50s. It was all the same. Because the initial wounding was so profound, and it happened before I even had conscious memory, and it just repeated in the relationships and situations of my young life, all the way through my childhood. And then I just became that pattern of abuse and just lived it out through the rest of my life. And though how that pattern lived in me became more perverse, more distorted, more of a manifestation and an embodiment of that feeling of being inwardly filthy. The things we do to ourselves when we have no self-respect, no self-worth. The things I allowed to be done to me, the way I lived. the way I treated myself, just heartbreakingly appalling, really. And I saw. But it was really funny because I saw something that I hadn't remembered for 50 years, and I was a child with my sister, who was 2 years older than me, and we walked in the village I grew up. We walked to a girl's house, maybe 100 yards away, 200 yards away. And my sister was going to a party, and we knocked on the door, and they said, "Oh, you're not invited." And they let my sister in, and I think they gave me a plate of jelly or something. And for some reason, that felt like such a wounding experience. And I remembered something else. You know, as a young teenager, the confusion and dread of hearing my drunken stepfather's footsteps on the bare stairs, stumbling into the wall as he walked up the stairs, because he was so drunk, just bursting into my room and standing over me and screaming and shouting, and just how terrified I was and how I fought him. We had fist fights, and that pure fucking rage. That pure, justified rage I felt, and how alone I felt. That wasn't as wounding as hearing him in my mother's bedroom below, talking about how misunderstood he was. Nobody came to me. Nobody said this shouldn't be happening. Nobody said I choose you. Nobody said, are you okay? What do you feel? What do you feel? Just so alone. And by that time, I rarely even think about that. I've never spoken about it on the channel, I don't think. Because it was just fucking normal. You know, by that time, it was just normal. But all the way through, there was just an invalidation of my being. And then later in life, in my 30s, just years and years of drug abuse. I'd stay awake for days, and then I'd collapse, exhausted, and I'd wait for sleep to take me. And I'd lie there, hallucinating, staring at the shadows moving in the dark. And I would go through the same hallucination every single time. And this happened a lot, countless times. And the hallucination would be people's voices talking about me, saying my name. And the fantasy that I was imagining was that the door was just about to be kicked in, and these imaginary people were going to rescue me, and they were going to take me away to a place where I'd be cared for, and I was going to be rescued, saved from myself, really, because I didn't have the tools. I didn't have the tools to even know how to function as a person, how to survive in any other way. To live in that life or death struggle because of the seed, the parasite of shame and abuse and neglect and unworthiness and invalidation that was just planted in me before I even remember. So we have an iceberg inside us, and that iceberg is held, condensed, diamond hard through the tension in our bodies. And the reason I had all those flashbacks was because I relaxed and made some space. And everything came flooding in. And we don't want that. We don't want that. We want to heal in the way we want to heal. We want to fix ourselves. We want to solve the problem that is us. And you're not a problem. Everything you are is who you needed to be. There's nothing fucking wrong with you. There was nothing wrong with me. I became who I needed to become. But now I need to be something else. Show up in a different way. So you have to melt that iceberg, that diamond hard iceberg of grief and heartbreak inside you, and validate those feelings and feel them. No one's going to fucking do it for you. No one's going to validate your feelings. You validate them. You say, this is what I felt. This is what I experienced. These feelings were real. These feelings were justified. These feelings were true. I felt this. This happened. Grieve. Melt that iceberg inside you. Unfreeze yourself. And gently it will become a placid lake. Upon the surface, the world is reflected. The inside is the outside. Presence becomes you. And I see so clearly now that, the microcosm of self-centeredness, the universe of our own fucking brokenness, so consuming. We're never really here. The world can't find us. No one else can find us. Our attention is always inward, in a complexity, trying to untangle it all, trying to fix it all. There is a world waiting for your presence. Waiting for you to just accept yourself. To say there is nothing wrong. There is nothing wrong. In the words of Teresa of Avila, we are butterflies with tattered wings. And those tattered wings are our frailties. They are our frailties. They are our wounds and our flaws. And all of that is essential. And if you are more wounded than most, more flawed than most, more frail than most, but you hide it with stoic strength, you have more opportunity. You have more opportunity to radically accept yourself and become humble. Because if you can't accept yourself and those tattered wings, you're refusing life. So don't try and fix it all. Try and accept it all. Try and see that everything that you are has a purpose. All the tension even has a purpose. The shame has a purpose. Everything has a purpose. You have a purpose. But that purpose thus far has been survival. What about presence? What about forgiveness? Forgive yourself for who you became. You mean something. You mean something. So, I think that's it. I usually miss something out that's really important, but that's it. I think If you need to get in touch, there's a link to my website under each video, or if you want to support what I do on this channel, donations are the only way I monetize the channel, so donations are very welcome and they help. Thank you to everyone that does donate. Thank you to everyone that comments. Thank you to everybody that trusts me enough to reach out and challenges me to dig deeper and find something truer in myself when we talk. So it's all about relationship. Okay, that's it. I'll see you soon. Bye.